This is part two of War and Anti-War. Section heading Trajectory. Chapter 4 The Revolutionary Premise. For all the conservatism of military institutions, there have always been innovators calling for revolutionary change. Don Morelli and the other officers charged with rethinking how an army must fight in tomorrow's world were part of a long military tradition. In fact, historians have filled the shelves of libraries with books about revolutions and warfare. All too often, however, the term has been applied too generously. For example, war is said to have been revolutionized when Alexander the Great defeated the Persians by combining the infantry of the West with the cavalry of the East. Alternatively, the word revolution is often applied to technological changes, the introduction of gunpowder, for instance, or the airplane, or the submarine. Admittedly, these produced profound changes in warfare. Surely they had enormous impact on subsequent history. Even so, they are what might be called sub-revolutions. They basically add new elements or create new combinations of old elements within an existing game. A true revolution goes beyond that to change the game itself, including its rules, its equipment, the size and organization of the teams, their training, doctrine, tactics, and just about everything else. It does this not in one team, but in many simultaneously. Even more important, it changes the relationship of the game to society itself. By this demanding measure, true military revolutions have occurred only twice before in history, and there are strong reasons to believe that the third revolution, the one now beginning, will be the deepest of all. For only within recent decades have some of the key parameters of warfare hit their final limits. These parameters are range, lethality, and speed. Armies that could reach further, hit harder, and get there faster usually won, while the range restricted, less well-armed, and slower armies lost. For this reason, a vast amount of human creative effort has been poured into extending the range, increasing the firepower, and accelerating the speed of weapons and of armies. A deadly convergence. Take range. Throughout history, war makers have tried to extend their reach. Writing about the war of the 4th century BC, the historian Diodorus Siculus reported that the Greek general Iphicrates, fighting on behalf of the Persians against the Egyptians, made his spears half as long again, and the length of the swords almost doubled, thus extending the range of the weapons. Ancient devices like catapults and ballistas could have a 10-pound rock or ball a distance of 350 yards. The crossbow, used in China in 500 BC and common in Europe by 1100, gave a soldier a standoff weapon of seemingly enormous reach. So horrible was this weapon that in 1139 Pope Innocent II tried to ban its use. Arrows reached an extreme range of about 380 yards in the 14th and 15th century. Yet for all the experimentation with archery over the centuries, the furthest range of any arrow as of late as the 19th century was 660 yards, achieved by the Turks. In actual fighting, the maximum range of weapons was seldom attained. By 1942, Alexander D. Seversky, in his visionary book Victory Through Air Power, urged the United States to develop aircraft capable of flying 6,000 miles, then seemingly impossible. Today, even leaving aside the potentials for space-based weaponry, there is scarcely any point on the globe that cannot, in theory, be targeted by intercontinental ballistic missiles, aircraft carriers, submarines, refueled long-range bombers, or combinations of these other weapons systems. For all practical purposes, the extension of range has reached its terrestrial limits. As with range, so with speed. In June 1991, the U.S. Department of Defense made public its alpha chemical laser, capable of producing 1,000,000 watts of power as part of the development of an anti-missile system. The laser can, if targeted correctly, reach an enemy missile at the speed of light, presumed to be the fastest speed possible. And as to lethality, the sheer kill capacity of conventional weapons has increased by 5 orders of magnitude, from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution to today. This means that today's non-nuclear weaponry, on average, is 100,000 times more deadly than it was when steam engines in factories began to change our world. As to nukes, we need only contemplate the consequences of 100 or 1,000 Chernobyls to appreciate the awesome threat that they pose. It is only within this last half-century that planetary doomsday scenarios became a serious subject of discussion. In short, 3 distinct lines of military range development have converged explosively in our time. Range, speed, and lethality all reached their outer limits at about the same moment of history, the present half-century. If nothing else, this fact alone would justify the term revolution in warfare. After the endgame. But this fact is not all. For in 1957, a mere dozen years after the first nuclear weapon was completed, Sputnik, the world's first spacecraft, burst into the heavens, opening an entirely new region to military operations. Space has already transformed terrestrial military operations in terms of surveillance, communication, navigation, meteorology, and 100 other things. No previous breakthrough, from the first use of the sea or the air as regimes for military action, can compare to the long-range implications of this event. A few years later, announcing the U.S. drive to place a man on the moon, President John F. Kennedy declared that while no one can predict with certainty what the ultimate meaning will be of the mastery of space, it may well be that space will hold the key to our future on Earth. These qualitative, indeed fantastic changes in the nature of war and the military all have come in short 34-year span. The very moment when the dominant civilization on Earth, second wave or industrial society, began its terminal decay, they came during the endgame of the industrial era, and at approximately the time when a new type of economic and social system began to take form. Even as some nations industrialize, a third wave or post-industrial civilization is springing up in the United States, Europe, and the Asia-Pacific region. And this helps explain why military revolution that lies ahead will be far deeper than most commentators have so far imagined. A military revolution in the fullest sense occurs only when a new civilization arises to change the old, when an entire society transforms itself, forcing its armed services to change at every level simultaneously, from technology and culture to organization, strategy, tactics, training, doctrine, and logistics. When this happens, the relationship of the military to the economy and society is transformed, and the military balance of power on Earth is shattered. A revolution of this profundity has happened only rarely in history.